And that concludes questions for oral answer. Order. Order. I have received a letter from the Honourable David Parker seeking to debate under Standing Order 389 the release of the report of the Auditor-General on the Saudi Arabia Food Security Partnership. This is a particular case of very recent occurrence for which there is ministerial responsibility. Given the high level of public interest in the matter, it warrants the immediate attention of the House by way of an urgent debate. I call on the Honourable David Parker to move that the House take note
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
of a matter of urgent public importance.
Mr. Speaker, the only positive for the Honourable Murray McCulley in this report is that the report finds that he is not guilty of the crime of corruption. No money went into his hands, and he is found not to have bribed anyone else. Sir, beyond that, this report is an absolute indictment of the government, their cover-up and their poor standards. Indeed, the Auditor-General is very, very clear in distancing herself from the immorality. I don't say the morality, I say the immorality of what has gone down here. And she says the use of a contract for services to resolve these matters was a decision made by Cabinet. I comment below on the quality of the Cabinet paper process, not on the decision itself. Sir, the government will turn up today, as they did with Sky City, and say that this report exonerates them. It does not, sir. It lays bare an absolutely disgraceful stain upon the record of New Zealand, which has acted immorally, improperly, wasted millions of dollars, covered it up, lied to the Parliament, lied to the public, and it is only because of the very good services of a couple of journalists in particular that this even came to light. Sir, this shabby sheep deal in the city, in the desert, was only exposed because two journalists chased it down. The first was Matthew Hooton. Matthew Hooton ran a number of articles in the National Business Review saying that this was a shady deal that did not make sense. The only thing he knew about at the time was the then said to be $6 million cost of a farm in the desert, which was meant to be some demonstration farm of New Zealand agricultural expertise. He said it never made sense. He postulated that it was linked to trying to get a free trade agreement with Saudi Arabia, an issue that the government denied, and he kept digging and poking away at it. The National Party pretended there was nothing wrong. Heather du Plessis-Allen, then at TV1, did an absolutely fantastic job of breaking the story. She ran a number of news items on TV1, and she raised the question as to whether this was all as it seemed, and she put in a number of Official Information Act requests. She also approached me. I smelt a rat here, sir. I don't normally fish in Parliament. I normally come with things that I can prove. But I came fishing, and when I came fishing, on the day I came fishing in respect of payments in addition to the $6 million payment, McCulley stood up on the tiles and told Heather du Plessis-Allen, oh, by the way, there's another $4 million cash payment that we haven't told you about. I came to this House and I asked questions about that $4 million cash payment, and Minister McCulley stood up in this House and pretended that that $4 million payment was necessary, one, to settle a legal risk, and two, to pay for intellectual property. He denied it was to facilitate a free trade agreement with Saudi Arabia. He blamed the prior Labor government. He blamed the prior Labor government, and he said that I should be ashamed of myself, that Phil Goff should be, for being part of that government, that Phil Goff should be ashamed of himself for causing that $4 million payment to Mr Al-Khalaf. That's what he told this Parliament, and that's what he told journalists. The Labor Party sought release of our cabinet papers in the last government relating to the extension of the ban on the export of live sheep to Saudi Arabia for slaughter, because Mr McCulley and the national government were saying that there was evidence in them to back up his assertion that it was our fault and that he was paying off a legal claim that we had created. The National Party then actively suppressed the release of those papers and breached the very Cabinet Convention which is meant to act for the preservation of the national interest. And after months, or it actually wasn't months, after weeks of them pretending that we couldn't see the full amount of paper of those cabinet papers, disclosing to the media redacted copies of them, pretending that in the redacted parts was evidence of some poor practice by the Labor government, I released them because the government was in breach of that convention and proved that those allegations that it was us that somehow created a legal risk were wrong, because of course it was always legitimate for the past government to ban the export of live sheep for slaughter, and we now all know that that was initially because of the death of sheep in transit, that some of those processes have improved substantially. But that was expanded or extended because of the evidence that was on TV about inhumane practices in Saudi Arabia after those sheep are landed, when they are slaughtered in very inhumane ways that would not be allowed if they were slaughtered in New Zealand before they were shipped as carcasses. Those practices included, stuffing them in boots, tying them up, cutting their tendons of their legs so that they couldn't run away. And there was great justification for the then Minister of Agriculture under the Labor government to extend that ban on the export of live sheep for slaughter. And the current government, under the then Minister of Agriculture, acted entirely appropriate when the national government, again, themselves extended the ban on the export of live sheep for slaughter, not once, but twice. And each time they did it, they acted legally. Therefore, it was always a fiction that there was a legal claim faced by the government that justified the $4 million cash payment. Sir, what has the Auditor-General said? And if I've got time, I'm also going to take the House through some of the papers. The Auditor-General says, I share many New Zealanders' concerns about the arrangements. I found significant shortcomings in the paper put to Cabinet in support of the decision to enter into the Saudi Arabia food security partnerships. On page 5, again on page 5. In my view, the settlement of agreements was provided under the guise of a contract for services. Guise, a disguised payment which was to facilitate a free trade agreement and to settle these grievances of Ali Al-Khalouf, Sheikh Ali Al-Khalouf, which had no basis in law. And then she goes on to say, importantly, the contract does not specifically reflect the settlement component relating to the grievance. That has been one of our points all along, that these documents misrepresented the true position. The Minister has denied it. He's been found out. And if we've now reached the point in New Zealand that the standard of conduct expected of ministers is so low that they have to be found to be guilty of a crime before they are forced to resign, that is a terrible state of affairs in New Zealand, sir. A terrible state of New Zealand, because, sir, what is the truth at the heart of this is that the incompetence of the minister has been shown up. Still don't have the free trade agreement. The incompetence of the minister has been shown up. Many millions of dollars wasted on a farm in the desert. The lambs died. Rather than showcasing New Zealand's expertise that sullied our reputation, what else has he done? Well, of course, sir, he has covered that up, as I've already addressed, and he's misled Parliament and public. The contract for services was intended to conceal the nature of the arrangement. That's what we've said, and that was what is improvement. And what does the Auditor-General further say? And this is still only up to page 5. The lack of transparency, both at the time of the decision and subsequently, has led to the concerns from the New Zealand public about the nature of the payments made. To date, Explanations from ministers or officials have not resolved those public concerns. That's quite true. In fact, until now, they've actively tried to cover up the true nature of these transactions. Then, as I've already said, the Auditor-General says the use of a contract for services to resolve these matters was a decision made by Cabinet. I comment on the quality of the Cabinet paper process, but not on the decision itself. She is making no comment on the morality of paying off a disaffected, multi-millionaire Saudi sheikh millions of dollars in order to facilitate a free trade agreement with Saudi Arabia. And the Labor Party is willing to make that call. That is unprincipled and wrong. It is not something that the New Zealand government should do. Mr. Speaker, the Auditor-General then says, and I quote, "I found some significant shortcomings in the Cabinet paper, including that it didn't clearly explain that the Al Khalaf Group would own the goods and services costing the government $6 million. It's a bit of a miss, isn't it, Mr. McCulley? It didn't identify how the $10 million, that was the $10 million in addition to the $4 million, the $10 million figure was made up, a figure that rose to $11.5 million. We actually know that that $11.5 million includes flying sheep Singapore Airlines to the other side of the world, to a farm in the desert where most of the lands died, and it was meant to be a model farm of New Zealand practice. She also says that the Cabinet paper signalled the risk of a claim against the government based only on the $20 to $30 million figure in the Cabinet paper said was suggested by the Al Khalaf Group. There was no assessment by ministry officials of the substance of that legal risk. I and media have been fighting for a year to prove that point, and the minister has resisted every attempt. I have got, under the OIA, notes where the chief executive of Foreign Affairs was schooled as to the obfuscatory answers he was to give at select committee to deny that. They've dragged the ministry into this cover-up as well. Sir, the Auditor-General says further, "I was surprised it was decided to use a contract with a private individual's business interests to resolve diplomatic issues between governments. It is difficult to reconcile the words of the contract with the unstated objectives." It's the cover-up, sir. And then the Auditor-General ends by saying, "Look, we're not a corrupt country, but transparency must be assured in order to avoid us being a more corrupt country." Sir, two other points. The report doesn't consider how it was that McCulley got his old mate, Alex Matheson, worked for him way back when, was working at for MED overseas, somehow came to be working for the Rugby World Cup for McCulley. Then at the end of that row, somehow he's appointed by McCulley as a roving sort of consular figure in the Middle East to sew up this deal. He was his inside man that sewed this up. How is it that MFAT allows themselves to be so manipulated by their minister that they allow that to happen? No consideration of how Michelle Bogue, the former president of the National Party, somehow inveigles herself into the deal. Sir, this is, I think, a disgraceful episode. I personally feel misled by Mr. McCulley. I've never said that he took a cheque or that he profited financially. I think it's a very, very narrow view of what is right and wrong if he is judged by anyone on the basis of whether he breached the Crimes Act in terms of corruption. The truth is that this was a disreputable waste of money, sir, that has been covered up for a long, long time, and it would not have come to the attention of the public had it not been for Matthew Hooton and Heather Duplessis-Allen, who I think we should be celebrating as actually having done very good investigative work on this occasion. Sir, can I also thank the Speaker for enabling the House to actually bring this to a head in a way that caused the Auditor-General inquiry. If it had not been for the thorough processes that we have around question time, again, the government would have avoided responsibility for wasting $11.5 million of taxpayer money, including a $4 million cash payment to Mr Al-Khalaf. Sir, we know it was a compensatory paper because there are other papers that we finally got under the Official Information Act that showed that Mr Khalaf's representative, Mr Asaf, George Asaf, said that they needed compensation. But why would a government ever think that you should buy your way into a free trade agreement by getting out of the way someone who's connected in Saudi Arabia with the then Minister of Agriculture and effectively pay him off because of his grievance, which was not substantial in law, in order to get a free trade agreement with the Gulf states?